All right, let's get going. Anybody feel more rested after a reading break? Me neither. It was a very productive week, but not restful. So we have a sample of one. Everybody else, you just slept and you don't even realize the week went by. So we've been talking, or we're talking about Paxos, about consensus building. One of the interesting things that happens when you actually really dig into Lamport's protocol, you realize that there's nothing wasted. He doesn't do anything that isn't necessary. But it isn't always obvious why it's necessary. So one of the things that we're going to explore is how do you actually verify that? And we have a tool that we're going to use in a little bit that will help us do that. So it's been 12 days. Let's see what you still remember, which is probably not a whole lot. So take 3 minutes, talk to the people around you, and see if you can explain Paxos in a way that they can understand. And if you listen to the description and you go, I don't think that's right, share it back. Because the only way you're going to actually really get it is literally to go over it and try to explain it to somebody else. Like every time I explain it, I realize there's always some little nuance that, oh, okay, I haven't quite thought about it that way. Or a confusion that someone else has that helps me understand it better. Nothing helps you understand something better than trying to explain it to someone else. So 3 minutes, not too bad, and that will let the stragglers come in as well. And you're just working on a polymer right now, right?
What? Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
You know, people actually do make money betting on horses. No way. Most people don't. The thing I always remember is casinos and tracks because they're always making money.
it can't be worth that much, right? Yeah, it's part of the transformation. I feel like there's no way to do it if we were actually going to do it. I couldn't figure out the second part. Like, I did the first part correctly, and the second part, like, well, I didn't try that hard. The second part is just so much shit is done. The first part is just chilling in the morning, well, I got a really bad mark. It's because yeah, but I wanted to see like if I could do it like as a compliment. That's true, because I don't feel any courses.
Oh my god.
When you random due dates, you have to like put it on your calendar. Like I put it the day before in the calendar. I put it the day before just because I know I can't like do it by
I still don't know what. I'll see if I can figure out what.
It's in the end of the module. It's not in like the. Oh, that's fine.
Oh, great.
All right. So, how did that go? Feel like you're really understanding the protocol at all? Anybody? Want to walk us through it? Oh, cowards. Afraid you might be wrong. Well, I don't have that problem because I always assume that I'm wrong when I start out, because it turns out that's usually the case. And even if I'm right, then I was wrong about being wrong. So I'm wrong. Whereas if you walk in and you always think you're right, then sometimes you're going to be wrong. It's an interesting thing, that whole optimism thing. What is it? One of my favorite sayings is that a pessimist is what an optimist calls a realist. Wrap your head around that one. What are we doing with Paxos? That's right. We're deciding what to have for dinner, right? That was the whole premise. And the really nice thing about that example is we're only deciding one thing. What are we going to have for dinner tonight? Tomorrow night, we get to make the decision all over again. We're not replacing the original decision. We're making the same decision for a different, in this case, temporal spot. What we're going to do when we turn this into a database replication technique is that instead of choosing the temporal spot, we're going to choose a slot in a log. Well, gosh, when you think about a slot in a log, this is entry 0, this is entry 1, this is entry 2, this is entry 3, this is entry 4. What does that remind you of? What did we do when we were trying to first define order in a distributed system? We used a clock by this crazy dude that came up with this algorithm, right? We came up with Lamport clocks, which are just monotonically increasing sequences. So a log is, in essence, an implementation of a monotonically increasing sequence. Every time I poke at this, it's like sort of the same thing. Okay, wow, this is about how do we tell time. Our chronometer is not a monotonically increasing sequence. Our chronometer is based upon the rotation of, what I usually like to describe it as, a small pebble that rotates on its own axis and then in turn rotates around a nuclear power plant, which happens to be very active right now outside, right? That doesn't mean that our clock is the only possible clock or the only possible way of telling time. It does have order, though. And that's kind of the whole point of clocks, is they establish the order in which things happen. So the purpose in Paxos is to take something that is inherently not ordered and squeeze it just right to get an ordering. Not necessarily the only ordering. We don't need the only ordering. All we need is an ordering. We need to make a decision for what to have for dinner. And there's no right or wrong. You know, whether you decide you're going to have sushi or burgers or chicken or whatever. They're just decisions. You just need to know what was the decision. So people were pretty quiet there. That's why I said, I'll fill that 3 minutes with something else. Great. So the whole point is what we want is a quorum. Now, when we only have a flat set like that, a quorum happens to be a majority. That was one of the things I sketched out last week. I literally sat down and said, was it last week? Maybe it was the week before. I did the whole data center thing. I think it was the week before now. I think I've already described this. I took the data center, put it on Mars, and said, now, how do I actually get this to convert in less than 22 minutes? And it did it. Actually, the simulation came up with an average consensus time of 233 milliseconds. Which wasn't bad. Pretty interesting. But most of the time, the quorum you're going to deal with are going to be these kinds of quorum. You got a set, you take a majority of the set, done. But here's the interesting problem that this slide is pointing out, and that is some of the acceptors don't know what was accepted yet. The reason that we have that quorum is because if this acceptor needs to know what was actually accepted, it or something else needs to read to find an overlap. But try doing it in your head. Look at that. Can you come up with any set of choices there that doesn't intersect with the actual decision? It's pretty obvious, right? This example is dumbed down, but it scales up. The point is there's no other combination that won't have at least one of the deciders, the acceptors, in the view. Now, the Paxos protocol has two rounds, right? It has the proposal round and it has the accepting round. So in the proposal round, you can propose whatever you want. In the accepting round, the only thing the proposer can accept is either its own proposal if no one else has accepted anything else, or what the other acceptor has already accepted. And that is really important. So yeah, I proposed burgers, but sushi wins because someone else had already accepted sushi. It's kind of a forcing function. It says if somebody else has already voted for something, I don't get to override their vote. But if we don't end up with a consensus here, I get to make a new proposal. If there is a consensus, the only thing that can come back in that new proposal is someone already voted for sushi. So let's suppose that there's a proposer that hasn't seen this decision. It doesn't know what's going on. It just simply proposes burgers. The only accept is going to get back are going to say sushi at this point. Now maybe they'll get one that says chicken or something. But then they'll know how to order those because they have ballot numbers in them. So the ballot numbers become the tiebreakers. And the whole point that I was making before, which is what we're trying to do is take something that is inherently unordered and force it into an ordered state, is precisely because of the decisions that we made in the protocol itself. The intersection always decides what the outcome was. And the beauty of it is because of the way that we've structured things, there isn't a possibility if we've implemented it properly. Remember that this is a protocol description, it's not the implementation. The protocol description says if you do this protocol, it will always work. You will always decide on the same thing. Even if somebody comes along later with a higher numbered ballot and says, I'm proposing waffles. And then you go back and you say, well, sorry, I already voted for chicken. And they voted for sushi. And their ballot numbers have to be higher than yours because otherwise yours would have been the winner. So the person with the highest ballot number that they voted for is the one that indicates the decision that we made. The weird cases, the edge cases, are when we didn't end up with enough votes for any of those before another proposal came out. And that's the raciness, that's the race condition, the indeterminacy that we have to try and resolve. So we're trying to force that down, and the protocol does that. But it doesn't do it in a highly constrictive fashion. The normal solution that you will actually see to this is that what we'll do is we will choose a leader, and the leader will be adopted based upon, most of the easy implementations are a network address. Because network addresses are unique and they have ordering. Unless you use the 127001 network address, in which case then there's no uniqueness to that. the thing that might be a little confusing here is that the proposer doesn't get to propose what they wanted. They don't get to accept what they wanted. They get to accept what some other node already said that they would accept. That's the waste that pushes this to actually making a durable decision. All right, so what I have given you, it's in the module on Canvas, is a TLA plus specification. And if you don't have TLA plus installed, it takes about 3 minutes to install. And you can actually take that TLA plus specification and you can actually run it. And it will take probably about 15 minutes to run. I ran it on my laptop this morning, and indeed, it actually ran for, I don't know, like 15 minutes. I still have a window with it. But the point here is, what I want to do is introduce you to a tool that can actually take a protocol definition and probe it to see if the invariants are violated or not. If it finds a path through the protocol that violates the invariants, it will stop and it will show you what that particular path was. This is the set of steps that I had to take in order to get this particular invariant violation. Now what's kind of cool about that is what I said at the beginning was everything here is load bearing. Everything that Lamport put into Paxos is there for a reason. Well, now you can actually take things out. You can remove elements and you can see that it will break. You can run it and boom, you don't have to wait 15 minutes for the answer that says, well, I couldn't find any violations. It doesn't guarantee the protocol is correct. It just says within the range that I searched, the protocol was correct. But the moment you start taking any of those specific details out or you break them, like let's suppose you changed the proposers accepting the highest ballot number that somebody else had already voted on, you said, I'm going to choose whatever I want anyway. It will actually show you why the protocol no longer works. And this is a Paxos protocol. You could probably improve the implementation a little bit. I took it and gave it to Claude and said, I played a trick on it. I said, so this was a TLA plus specification for Paxos that, actually I didn't even tell what it was for. This is a TLA plus specification that was hallucinated up by a different LLM. Can you please give me a critique of it? And they proceeded to give me this whole critique of it about it. Oh my gosh, this is bad, blah, blah, blah. And then, but it hedged at the end and said, well, but I'd really have to run it through TLC to see if it actually worked right or not. And then I said, well, actually I did run it through TLC. And then it admitted that in fact, and we explored that, by biasing question, Claude did its performance thing, which was, oh, you want me to find holes in this thing. And it did. It tried. But it didn't actually do it. It just simply sounded like it had done it. It gave me all sorts of things to go look at and check, well, maybe not sure about that. And then after I pointed out that I had biased it, it said, yeah, you're right, you did bias it. And I gave different analysis than I would have if I hadn't been given that prior. And I mention that because, especially when I'm working with TLA plus specifications, I'm normally not writing them directly. The reason I haven't used them in classes prior to this is TLA plus is like learning Greek. How many of you have learned Greek? I mean, there's always the possibility that somebody actually grew up in a Greek-speaking household. And then I would ask my next trick question, which is, and do you know how to read and write in polyphonic Greek? At which point most people would be like, what? Even people who speak modern Greek. Polyphonic Greek was only used in ancient Greek. But it's supported by Windows. So you can actually read the Odyssey in the original Greek. Something like that. I'm not quite sure why. But at any rate, so did anybody find the TLA plus specification in the module where I dragged it this morning? You, good. Okay, one person. That means the rest of you are just slacking. I'm okay with that. And if you just want to be lazy about it, I can just show you what I did. See, but not that way, because that I do have 11. There we go. And then I come back over here. No. Oh, right, because it's. I see. Oh, because it's on the wrong screen, that's why, okay. Actually, it shouldn't have mattered. Ah, that'll work too. It's funny. Ah, lordy. That's not recording right. All right. It's paying my here. All right, this is as good as it's going to get. You literally just download it from the PLA Plus website. It's a Java jar. And you run it. I'm just kind of curious how many people actually play with PLA Plus since we talked about it, 2 weeks ago. I figured nobody would. That's cool. It started at 8:23 this morning. What time did it end? 8:45. So it took 22 minutes. Oh, you had to run it? Your laptop died. Because it has no power or because you decided to send it? See, mine? I always assume I have to carry my power brick with me, so. I like the power sources. Actually, no, they're on. This is kind of a good classroom. And you can't even like check the polymark is not like fun there. That's alright. This is like I wouldn't be surprised if we can't run PLA Plus. I haven't personally done it, but basically that's just math without without keyboard on it, right? I don't know if you can run on your phone, but you can try. No, he's on his polymarket account. He's got to be making money because Bitcoin's been falling and he is cashing in. was like below $65,000 a Bitcoin. And I know I'm kind of like the same way. It's like, I don't really care. Someone cares. And of course, it can actually be a point that those times just last years, whereas at some point we're going to get 2016 consensus.
She says 100K.
So how do you know? So
Oh, the exam is over.
the first part is like the new one is.
And it's binding them, so you can like move on, go and sleep.
I have a question.
42.
No, wow. I forgot to submit. I thought I was doing it like this, but now I forgot to submit. Okay, everyone's gonna listen. Do DP1 and DP2.
I screwed that up, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Well, I don't know how much it's worth because it's just in a 55% pocket, so I'm just curious if it's like.
Well, and the idea was that nothing here is supposed to be that important that it makes any
So
difference.
it won't kill me.
Okay, you're definitely not going to kill you. I try very hard not to sabotage people that way. You can do that yourself.
I will.
You might only get a 92% instead of a 93%, in which case then, you know, that some people consider that to be failure. Because anything less than 100 is, of course, a failure.
Sorry,
Oh, what's up?
I think I'm misunderstanding.
I had one yesterday. I studied for one yesterday, and then I came home and
That's what I'm saying.
No, he's showing violations.
Yeah, but
Oh, these are violations.
they're gonna put that in the chat GPT.
No, you actually use you're actually running. I don't care. So you know that you're going to TLA plus that. It should actually be showing you. Should show you violation. You're supposed to look at me like 120 million states there.
Usually what happens
Oh.
shows
I won't make that. Now it's out of my hair. Done. Done. Okay, he's still running. Oh no, actually we're gonna start. That's blowing up. Okay, so you're seeing what you're seeing is a violation of liveness. And that's interesting. So that's a very nice manifestation of that. So you violated liveness, in other words, they're never going to keep on. So they're not violating anything because
it's not violating safety.
right.
So that's the guarantee.
But it's violating. So eventually what will happen is it will time out. Whatever timeout was on it, it will time out. And that's kind of the opposite flip side. And what it should show you is an impact on the liveness. Because what you'll probably notice at some point is that the queue of states to explore continues to increase.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and now
Yeah, it
that
started with one, and now, oh my god, finally got an error. Oh, okay, so it can't just take a really long time.
right, probably, yeah. Now see, I think that's as interesting as seeing when it works. Because when it doesn't work, then you can be like, oh, what is it showing? It should show you a route or a path through that caused an invariant violation. Because the other thing that can happen is if it just never converges, you just fail to get the timeout because it caps the timeout. But the moment you have an invariant violation, it's right, it does stop.
Yeah, it's just like
I don't know. What did the error tell you?
I don't even know what it's telling me. I think I'm might have set up the model wrong. You don't have
Yes, but it's not
That's what I mean. It's like
So if you can actually just start wrong, I need to wrong and solve. Yeah, because I was already so strong. It's like,
that's okay. I mean, I said they were blank. I was like, there's no value. I put couple values.
and what happened when you just use the base one should work. Because that's all I did.
You said that's blank, but they left me instead of their winners. You have to put some values.
That's odd. And see, now, the mistake I made, obviously, was not running inside of VS Code. Because I just simply ran it on the command line. Because that's usually the way. What's a command line? It's a Java. It's a Java. So the other thing that is probably happening is whatever the VS Code TLA plus add-in is doing is probably using a different version of Jar or a different version of Java, or I'm not sure what. That's interesting. I'll have to figure that one out. So this is the fun thing about doing in-class demos, right? Is that everybody's using a slightly different set of tools, something different. That's why I said I'm going to bring one that actually works, because this I didn't change anything. I just ran it, and it did in fact run. It ran for 22 minutes before it said it didn't find any violations. It gives you an estimate of what the probability is that there are no errors, because anytime you're doing exhaustive search like this, there's no boundedness. So all you can really do is search the search space up to a certain point. When you're using the DS Labs, it's essentially doing the same kind of thing. It's doing a search where it's saying, can I find a violation? Can I find something? So it has a slightly different check, which is that it also looks to make sure you're making progress. Because if you have too many states and it goes up too far, it won't be able to get to where it wants to be after a finite number of steps. So the people that I know who have used it, usually run into the bad issue, which is they put too many extra steps inside it. And so it's forcing a different problem, which is how do you make sure that the spec, that the protocol is as minimal as possible. Whereas here, all I'm doing is testing the same thing. Is it consistent? That one's interesting. That's a different problem. Because she was using VS Code and it did work for her. She did eventually find a violation. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there. Because you shouldn't have had to change the spec at all to get it to work. That was what I was checking this morning, going, make sure that this still works. It did work. I'm glad I brought the artifact, otherwise you guys be going, oh shit, just make this up. All right. Fun. So let's see here. I need to change this back to the slide. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right, so in fact, the point here is if you take out the decision to accept the highest previous ballot that the acceptor has voted for, that's when you see this break. And that was exactly what I was talking about before. Is you look at that and you go, well, why do I have to vote for sushi because they voted for sushi and I want chicken, or vice versa? And the answer is, well, because the protocol actually doesn't work right if you take that out. And so my goal here wasn't to get you to have a deeper understanding necessarily of Paxos, but to give you a tool that allows you to explore protocols more generally, to say, I want to do something clever. I want to think outside the box. I want to build an interesting variant of Paxos. And that's actually, if you're doing research, that's still part of the research space. Heidi Howard got her PhD, I don't know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and that was what her work was. It was like, how can we change things in Paxos? How can we relax these different constraints and figure out protocols that are not only interesting, but also actually usable in the real world? So I'm trying to walk that fine line between helping you understand the existing protocol, but also then having the imagination, because you're not locked into this yet. You haven't been doing this for 30 years and sitting there going, oh, well, that's the way we just do things here. You're at this point in your life where you can actually question things. You can say, why do we do that? And this is a tool for exploring that space. And I know you're all sitting there going, I don't have time to explore spaces right now. I just need to finish this degree and move on with my life. And you're right. But at some point, you will be finished, and you will think back to this and go, I'm in this interesting situation now where I do want to explore that. That's my life, which is to explore all sorts of crazy ideas. Like, gee, what happens when you want to build a Martian data center? You write a paper about it, and you put it on X, and you see if Elon notices. Haven't done that yet. Thought about it, though. So if you run that, what will happen is the model checker will actually identify a safety violation. I don't know if that's the same safety violation you got, but it's not hard, because pretty much anything you change in the TLA Plus specification is going to trigger either a safety violation or it's going to run out of time because it never converges. That's a liveness check. How many of you have actually used the DS Labs for design project 1? Right, you did the implementation of somebody else's design. Was that painful? Good. It was actually supposed to be. Because I think that the learning lesson there isn't, I can write a better design. It's, this is why looking at someone else's design critically is important, because I might be handed that same design and asked to implement it. It's really easy to sit there and go, yeah, you know, this looks fine, it's very pretty, I really like the emojis that you put in it. He's laughing in the back. Do you know that I've just spent some time, literally yesterday, looking at the Claude systems prompt? There's actually an instruction in it that says, don't put emojis in responses. I'm like, really? But the one that was more interesting to me is they actually have conflicting instructions in there. And this is an area I've been looking at for a while. It's like, what do you do when someone gives you a do this and a don't do this in a set of 15,000 tokens worth of instructions? So what is that, about 7,500 words? It's like a small essay. Like, really? 7,500 words. What do you do with that? More interestingly, what does an LLM do when you give it that system prompt? Depends on which one you give it to. Anybody in here use Claude Code? You actually will find that if you use Claude Code, it gives different behaviors depending upon which model you're using. That one surprised me. It's like, wow, they decide how to deal with this differently. And as far as I can tell, nobody in Anthropic's paying any attention to that. All right, so there you go. So that's, the whole point here was why we have this. And I guess now the question is to reflect back on that and to say, what does that tell us? So we have this we know this is a requirement. Why? What is this doing? What does this preserve that's important to us? Just 3 minutes. Just talk about it. We don't have a final. I don't know why they're scheduling it. I told them in the beginning of the term. They asked, I said no final, and they scheduled one anyway. And I don't understand why. I was like, why? I should, in all fairness, I should have actually made sure that the email doesn't say the wrong thing. They could have left not out. But I'm suspecting that they read it and just assumed that they missed something, not me. I was free, and they scheduled one else. But, I mean, if you want a final, I can actually come up with a final, but I'll give it a 0 point. Because I don't have any room in the grading schedule. And you want to know the real reason why I wasn't willing to do a final in this class? Because the last time I did a final before 16 was the last time I taught it. It was the Friday from 7 till 10 p.m. before Christmas. December 23rd. And it was like, what? And this time they had a final date that was outside of my appointment window. And I'm like, oh, I can't agree to potentially having to do a final when I'm not working for you because I no longer have access to the data. I mean, I can't, like, I'm not even supposed to like look at the grade book or deal with Canvas after that day. And frankly, I'm not a big fan of final exams. When you shove your head full of stuff. Because the final exam I did was actually making people do a design in class. So literally giving a different problem, different people had different problems, and you just had to pick one and then build a design. And it's like, and I got the same question just now on Discord too. That's the other thing that I'm learning is that having too many different channels of communications means that, you know, I set up that little anonymous feedback form, and I was checking it religiously every day, and then I just stopped. And then I went and looked at it over the break, right, day before yesterday, and I said, damn it, people put stuff in it. So I responded, okay. All right, so the point here is that what we're trying to do is solve the liveness problem with that. Because we had to remember the dueling proposers. Nobody, it just takes a little too long for us to get to a decision, and so we just keep seeing higher and higher ballot numbers, and FLP teaches us that unless we build some timing assumptions in here, there's no easy way for us to escape this. So what we're basically arguing is that eventually a single proposer must win at some point. We're trying to force that convergence, but that's, as you pointed out, a liveness property, not a safety property. Running forever and not making a decision isn't useful, but it isn't wrong. So if your primary goal is making sure that your database copies are consistent, you're okay with that. The reality is people don't like it when you never answer. Because you haven't made the decision for what to have for dinner tonight, and it's now a week later, and you're no longer even mobile because you stopped eating. I mean, I know everybody knows that they'll die within a week if they eat, right? It's a joke. Right?
So not me. Give me a few weeks.
A few. Actually, it's water that will kill you much faster. I think people can generally survive for more than a week without food. So how do we get to that single proposer? That's what phase one forces us to do. That's why I said it's this throttle that tries to get us to a decision point faster. It doesn't guarantee it, but it makes it more likely. So phase one isn't just gathering the information, it's also identifying who gets to propose the actual outcome. So the acceptor's promise was, I won't listen to anybody who has a lower ballot. So in other words, I'm not going to vote for someone whose ballot number is below the one that I'm now accepting. I can accept a higher numbered ballot, but not a lowered number ballot. The proposer has to get a quorum. If we've already reached a quorum, there will be an intersection. One of the acceptors will say, this is what I voted for. It will have the highest ballot number, and that's what the proposer can then accept. Because now the proposer has a set of decisions from the acceptors, and it can make the decision. It can make its own decision if there were no other acceptances of anything else, or it has to take the one with the highest ballot number. And then it tells everybody what was actually decided. Now, if anything goes wrong, and this is exactly what TLA Plus is doing, if anything goes wrong in any of those steps, it's saying, well, what happens if the proposer sends out one message that says this has been accepted, but then no one else gets their messages because the proposer dies? What will happen in that case? Well, any subsequent quorum will have to have the thing that it voted for last. Now, if the one that got accepted, let's see, so the proposer sends the message that says this is what we adopted, then if that isn't in the next quorum, how is it going to know what got accepted? I have to think about that one. And that's essentially what TLA Plus is doing. It's automating that probing, that thinking. Okay, here I have this weird case where we get one accept out standing. We one accept out, but then the proposer dies, and the acceptor that got the message dies. Well, then the acceptor that got the message isn't going to show up. The proposer isn't going to propose again. So someone else will come along and propose. And I think that actually we can end up with a different decision there, but we'll still end up with a quorum, because no one else learned about it. That's the interesting sequence. It's always that we only need to know that once we've made that decision, it becomes durable. But part of that is this weird intermediate state where the proposer thinks it's been accepted, and he starts sending out messages, but then dies. But since he died prematurely, until there's a number of the quorum of acceptors have been notified of the adoption, and that's when it stops. As long as the acceptors learn the final outcome, we'll never roll backwards. But there is, I think, a window where you could actually have the proposer tell one acceptor that it had accepted, that had been decided. But not the others. Then a different proposer proposes a different solution. That gets a consensus. Okay, so if the proposer and acceptor both go away, we still can get a quorum through a different set of acceptors, but that will always have a higher ballot number. So when the system recovers, we'll be able to figure out what the decision was. Now, I'm sure that probably didn't make a lot of sense, because even as I'm walking through it, I'm like, this is a hard case. These are the kinds of edge conditions in distributed systems that really do have you sitting there drawing diagrams on whiteboards and going, we don't have a whiteboard, we have a chalkboard. Which is fine, because in Spanish, the word for chalkboard and whiteboard is the same. So I'll just use Spanish. It's a piece of Rome. Okay. And that's why I say, every time I teach this, I think through these cases and realize why it just gets a little complicated. But now, we've only made one decision. But maybe we actually want to have a replicated database with more than one value. Now is where we get into the second round of the protocol, and this is in fact the typical protocol implementation. If you implement Raft, this is what you're going to be implementing, which is, we have two phases. In the first phase, we choose a leader. The distinction between view-stamped replication and Raft versus Paxos is Paxos elects the leader. The others use a non-election based protocol for deciding who is the leader. Why do you want a leader? What problem does a leader solve? It's the problem I just talked about. What problem does the leader solve? What is the problem that we just got done talking about? What was it? We were discussing it there. You know, what the wasn't the safety issue. It was the right. Exactly. So if we never make a decision, we don't make forward progress. What we want is a system that makes decisions quickly. So what we want to do is we want to optimize that by having one proposer, not n. If we only have a single proposer, then we don't have that race condition anymore. Because the only place we're going to get things from is that single proposer. That means the hairy edge of this problem now only happens when the proposer dies. Now we're back to the three-phase commit, three-phase commit problem. Remember, in two-phase commit, the problem was the coordinator would die. The coordinator is, in essence, a leader in that particular situation. When the leader dies, we have to do extra stuff in order to recover from that. So this becomes our recovery protocol. This is why I talk about failure over and over again, because the interesting stuff here, and the reason we build these mechanisms, is to give us the tools we need to recover from the failure. Non-failures happen all the time. If they happened all the time, we wouldn't need something like TLA+, like probe the search space. Things that only happen once in a rare while. And anything that happens only once in a rare while are the things that break in production. Well, your database is available 99.999% of the time, and the other 1% of the time, sorry, you have to restore it from backup. Let's look at the backup part. We don't want to do that. That's not the problem we're trying to solve. We're actually trying to solve the real problem. So, in Multi-Paxos, we choose who gets to be the leader. And then we start implementing the linearization that I was talking about before, which is, we're back to the same problem. And that's what I think Lemport really got here. He nailed it. He said, this is the same thing. It's the same machinery. You're just using it for a different decision. Here's what's for dinner tonight. Here's what's for dinner tomorrow night. Here's what's for dinner the night after. And if you think of that as a log, that's what we almost always implement. That's really what we're deciding. A log? How does this relate to a database, though? A log is just a linear list of records. I could do that with a JSON-L file and just keep sticking JSON records on the end of it. Yeah, you could. What does the log give us that we don't have in Paxos? Observability. I think I can see both of them. What? And I actually mentioned this before. When we're deciding our dinner, what are we doing? We're doing something that is ordered. We're defining the ordering of events. We don't decide that, well, we're going to have chicken tomorrow, and then I'm going to choose what we're going to have tonight. Yeah, I suppose you could do that, but, and I'd argue there are actually Paxos implementations that do actually do that. But the purpose of the log is to establish a linear order of events in an asynchronous system. The problem with an asynchronous system is we don't have a linear order of events. We're not trying to say this is the exact sequence. What we're trying to say is whatever sequence it went through, this is the decision it made. That gives us, I'm back to lattices now, that gives us our isomorphic path through. Paxos forces it to make one decision, so we know that regardless of how it got to that one decision, we know what the decision is. Now we put it in our log. And so what Paxos ends up being is nothing more than a decision about what comes next. And RAF does the same thing, and view stamped replication does the same thing. And it doesn't matter what consensus protocol you end up looking at, they all do the same thing. They all linearize asynchronous events. Blockchains do exactly the same thing. They linearize transactions. The blockchain example is a little more complicated because it's Byzantine. In other words, we don't trust anybody, which leads to interesting analysis. One of the papers that I actually did, I don't know if it was for today, I think it was for today actually, was the Google paper on like how you really implement Paxos in production, what it really looks like when you're sitting at Google and implementing this stuff. And this is fun. This is the hard stuff because it's really difficult to think about asynchrony. Our brains are not wired for it. It is not a natural thought pattern. This is, in the end, why people come into distributed systems and say, this is hard. Yeah, because sometimes you have to sit there and think about what possible paths could have been taken here. If you can do that, you can go do particle physics too, because they do exactly the same thing, which is they shoot things at each other at high velocities, and then they look at the wreckage afterwards and they go, ooh, how did we get here? They reconstruct a plausible path through the lattice that would explain what they're seeing. When you build distributed systems and they fail, what you will do is you'll find yourself doing exactly the same thing, which is, how did I get here? And you work backwards from it. And you use the insights you get from working backwards from it to say, how am I going to not get here next time because I don't want it to break? And your failure domain, your understanding of the potential things that can go wrong will expand. Stable leaders actually are an efficiency hack, and almost anything we do in these protocols ends up being about optimization. That protocol, the Paxos protocol, when you start looking at the number of messages it's sending around, it's astonishing how fast it blows up. The leader mechanism collapses that. We don't have lots of different proposers now, we have one. But Paxos is also resilient in that way because we have one right now. And Paxos automatically provides a way for someone else to come along and say, I want a new leader. And you can choose the next leader. You're not changing who the current leader is, you're choosing the next leader. And that's one of those points of sophistry in the way that the protocol is implemented. So now what we have is we have a series of leaders. And the way that you can distinguish decisions is by under which leader was the decision made. And they're going to actually chain that together. So when we are making decisions in Multi-Paxos, the thing that goes in the log not only records what the decision was in this layer of Paxos, but what leader was running things at the time that decision was made. And that's going to be really important because that's going to be how we successfully navigate a leadership change. How do we know what the previous leader chose? My classic example here is that imagine that you plug a brand new replica into your Paxos system and it's got a proposer on it, and it says, I want to be leader. You just plug the damn thing in, and it thinks it's got delusions of grandeur, and it comes along and says, I am going to make all of the decisions from henceforward, and it gets a majority of the vote, so now it's the new leader. What is the problem? It has no idea what was decided up to that point. But okay, now. So what we do then is it can't start making new proposals until it knows what the old proposals that were adopted were. And that's where it gets really interesting, because you literally could end up with a situation where you have to like move hundreds and hundreds of different log entries over to this new leader so it knows what the prior decisions were. And I like that case because it's happens and it's so crystal clear why it doesn't work until you get consistency with the new leader. The new leader has to know everything that was decided by the old leader. Now the new leader is allowed to repropose the things the old leader did. That's perfectly acceptable. Sometimes they do that. It's fine as long as you don't change what the decision was. You know, next week, the new leader doesn't get to change it, what you had for dinner last Thursday. No, it doesn't work that way. You don't get to change the past. And that's really it in a nutshell. That is what Multi-Paxos is. But Paxos and Multi-Paxos solve different problems. And most people just simply try to solve the Multi-Paxos problem because they're really only interested in the distributed database solution. But, let's see, I really should look at the forward slide, so I can't see it that far. Okay, so we're going to actually see an example of where Paxos is what you want to use and not Multi-Paxos. And it's not an imaginary system, it's a real system that is really in production use. I feel like I kind of touched on this, but so if phase one is leader election, what triggers a new phase one? I mean, you could say it's the death of the old leader, but how do you know what the death of the old leader is? You do timeout. I gave you the example of something that says, I just got plugged into the network and I don't know who the leader is, so I'm going to propose myself. And as far as it's concerned, the timeout is infinity. So that's kind of the point, is anybody can actually call a new leader election, but normally you don't call a new leader election unless you think the old leader is maybe not there anymore. So we typically use timers. But it doesn't require that. It is an optimization to use a timer-based mechanism.
So if you don't call new election unless the old ones, we think the old one's dead, like how, what if there is a different proposer? Maybe I'm just very lost. Like
we have, so what is it proposing? So there can only be one proposer in phase two.
Okay.
Because the decision in phase one is who's the proposer.
Okay, but maybe I have something to put in there, you know, like I have something to store, right? So I need to make a proposal.
You need to go to the leader and ask it to propose it for you.
I see.
So the leader becomes, but yeah, so part of what is, I think, missing here is we're talking about the internal protocol. And what actually happens is if you're a client and you want to propose something, you send a request, like a put.
I see.
You send the put request or the get request to a proposer.
I see.
Yeah. And
So the client is never the proposer.
no, the proposer is a proxy on behalf of the client.
Okay.
The proposer actually doesn't. I mean, so if you're the one proposing dinner, then you're acting both as client and as proposer. Excellent question, though. Really good question. All right. So this actually is the good question, right? So take 2 minutes and ask yourself, why would you not want to use Multi-Paxos? And you're welcome to ask your favorite large language model
even if it's Grok. I won't respect you, but you laugh. I actually saw somebody using Grok to make fun jokes about Claude today on X. I mean, it's not as good as the guy who did the hit piece. I'm sorry, the AI that did the hit piece. Anybody see that one? That's the one that scared me. Some AI tried to submit a PR to an open source repository, and it was declined because the open source repository doesn't accept PRs. But instead of accepting that, the AI agent went and researched this guy, pulled up information about him, and then posted a blog post someplace that like was it was a hit piece, right? He basically just told the world how terrible this person was. It's like, that's a really weird one. I feel like there's some part of that story that I don't fully have pieces of, but it made for really good headlines. Come back from reading break and you're already exhausted. All right. So what? When I talked about using Multi-Paxos, what did I talk about us using it to do? Wasn't that long ago, was it?
Make many decisions.
Make many decisions that are ordered. It's the linearization that we're interested in. What happens if we need to make many decisions that aren't ordered? Can you ever think of a situation where you don't really care about the order in which the decisions were made? If only I had one on the next slide. Corfu is a distributed shared log that Microsoft Research released in 2012. It's actually very cool. It's a very interesting log in that you can think of it as a distributed log that different entities are using for recording their own decisions. The log positions are right once. There is a sequencer that provides something that's kind of like a ballot number, but it's not a leader. It's just a hint on where the next place is to read. Or to write, rather, not to read. The next place you can write. If the sequencer isn't there, then the clients just simply look around for empty places to write. They're not interested in linearizing their decisions, they're just interested in recording them. And what's kind of cool about this is when we were talking about observability before, I talked about consistent cuts and whatnot, you can actually use this sort of a log to build observability for a distributed system. And that was what they were using it for, as I recall. There's no stable leader here. There's a hint mechanism. That's an optimization. It's not required by this protocol. If the hint mechanism is taken out, it still works. So Multi-Paxos assumes that we have a linearized list of decisions. Corfu says, I'm making decisions that don't need to be linearized. They're just observations in a log. And what I find interesting about this is I've actually seen some of the implementations of Multi-Paxos, like the Paxos made moderately complex, which is the underpinnings of the DS Labs. They actually make decisions about who owns the log space, but doesn't require that they write there. So it's like an allocation mechanism. It's sort of an interesting blend of these things.
you build this sparse log. A lot of this is about what's called state machine replication. How many of you remember what state machines are? What are they? How patient people look at? Sorry?
Circles and arrows.
Circles and arrows. Wow. That's a very interesting description of it. That could be almost anything, including Valentine's Day cards.
Same thing.
Same thing. It's a very interesting romantic life, doesn't it? And I think if it was Shakespeare, it'd be slings and arrows, not circles and arrows. But I got it.
Events and actions.
Events and actions. We're back to romance again. Okay, bad joke. Let's move on. So, a state is some description of information. What, where is the tape head on the tape? And what we have are state changes. When this thing is read off the tape, this is what I do. I move the tape head, or I read or write to the tape position, those kinds of things. So they are really just descriptions of, here's where the world is right now, this happens, here's where the world is now. And that's the beauty of it. It fits exactly with our linearized model, because if I start with an empty database and I have a log of all of the mutations that were ever done to the database, that log is linearized. That's the thing we're using Paxos to replicate. And we then apply that log to the database to get us to the current state. And the reason this becomes important in our distributed systems is because when we are maintaining replicas of a database, what we are doing is ensuring that all of the copies are the same. Now the weird part about this is we're not making sure they are the same, we're making sure they look like they are the same. And that distinction is really important because we can play games with time. The client sends a request to us, and we look at our copy of the database. But the database is also changing because we have this Paxos protocol that's going on. What we can do is say, I'll wait until all of the outstanding proposals have been decided. So you literally can look and say, this is the highest numbered ballot I've already seen, or the highest numbered proposal, which is based on a ballot number. And I will not satisfy that read until all of the decisions before that have either been made or not made. And maybe they didn't win, so we went to a higher ballot number. And the beauty of this is, I'm not saying this is the value it is right now. I'm saying this could have been the value at some point between the time the client sent the request and I sent the response. And that goes back to our earlier discussion about consistent cuts, about making sure that we maintain the correct ordering, even in a system where we don't have a single ordering. We have a potential ordering. And since we're returning the message in a way that is consistent with the potential ordering, we're consistent. Now, I realize that's a mouthful and a headful because you're saying, wait a minute, you're telling me that there's no absolute truth here. And the answer is yes, there's no absolute truth here. All I'm returning is something that would have been true at some point in time. I'm not returning you state that is older than your request unless that state was visible after your request. And that's why I hold your read. your get request. I hold your get request until I make sure that anything that could have affected it goes away. And this is a huge surface area for optimization, because you can literally look and say, there's nothing in flight, so therefore my view of the world is consistent right now, so I can return that. But if there are things that are in flight, if there are changes, then I may have to actually go and see what the current state of the world is. And how do I see what the current state of the world is? I'm patient. And how do I know if my log is up to date with other people's logs? In Paxos, how do I know what the decision was? Right. I just simply have to read other nodes until I have a form. And once I've read a form, I know what the state of the system was at some point. And that's all I need to know. So it's in fact the quorum that becomes the defining characteristic here. Lamport's model included learners. And the learners are the databases. For a learner to know that its database is up to date, it needs to read a quorum. It needs to pull the acceptors and say, what happened there? What's going on? So often what you'll see in real world implementations is that the learners are informed by the proposer. So the learner is explicitly messaged from the proposer, so they learn more quickly. Now that's sort of the interesting thing about this. It all comes back to that consensus over and over and over again. It's the consensus that gives us that modicum of consistency that we need in order to reason about this stuff. And I'm going to end here, and I will shuffle this around and probably we'll pick it up on Thursday, because I think this is important. This whole idea of the learner, which is the piece that you might have not remembered from the original model, which was its proposers, acceptors, and learners. And I didn't really talk about the learners, and nobody called me on it. Nobody said, why did I have this extra learner thing in there? But the learner is what's going to make sure that our databases remain consistent. So we'll talk about that on Thursday.
Absolutely.